So you might think the US national debt is, well, an American problem. But here's the thing. If that debt bomb goes off, it's going to affect everyone. Yeah, that includes you. The numbers are just so huge, they're almost impossible to wrap your head around. But we're going to break it down. And to really get what's at stake, we need to make this personal. Let's start with a number. Okay, so this is where it really hits home. For every single household in America, the national debt comes out to about $260,000. Right now, today. Now, to put that in perspective, let's rewind to 1980. Back then, that number was just $39,000. That leap is, well, it's astronomical. It takes this giant, abstract problem and plops it right down on your kitchen table. So that's the setup. And it really brings us to the two massive questions we're going to tackle in this explainer. First, how in the world did we even get here? How did the debt spiral so completely out of control? And maybe even more important, what happens if that bill finally comes due? What does that mean for the US and for the rest of us? All right, let's dive in. The numbers here, they're just mind-boggling, right? They feel totally abstract. So, to make sense of it all, let's use a really simple analogy. Think of it like this. America has a credit card, and folks, it is maxed out. You know, it's actually pretty straightforward. The government gets its income from taxes, right? But what happens when it spends more than it brings in? On things like defense, Social Security, you name it. Well, just like us, it has to borrow money to cover the difference. And that borrowing, that is the national debt. And if you want a stat that really puts this into perspective, look no further than the debt to GDP ratio. It's basically the country's total credit card bill compared to its total annual income. And right now, it's at 120%. What does that mean? It means the US owes more money than its entire economy produces in a whole year. Get this, that is higher than it was at the peak of World War II, when the country was literally funding the biggest war in human history.
But here's a really crucial point, and it's something a lot of people miss. That $35 trillion number is, yeah, it's staggering. But it's not actually the most immediate danger. The real problem, the crisis that's brewing right now, it's all about the interest.
I mean, just look at this timeline. It shows you exactly how fast this thing spun out of control. It took the United States 205 years from its founding to rack up its first $1 trillion in debt. 2 centuries. But today, the US is spending over $1 trillion in a single year just on interest payments. The debt was kind of stable for decades, and then the 2000s hit, and it just became this runaway train, fueled by wars, stimulus packages, tax cuts, you name it.
And this, right here, is where we enter the real danger zone. Remember when central banks raised interest rates to fight inflation? Well, for the government's debt, those interest payments didn't just go up, they exploded. We are now officially in a dangerous feedback loop. We're borrowing new money just to pay the interest on the money we've already borrowed. It's the classic trap of paying off one credit card with another, but on a national scale.
Seriously, think about this for a second. Very soon, the single biggest line item in the entire US budget isn't going to be the military, it's not going to be Social Security, it's going to be interest payments. Just interest. That's money that's not building roads, not funding new research, not investing in anything for the future. It's just gone. So how does this all spiral into a full-blown crisis? Well, that brings us to the tipping point. And it all boils down to one single, fragile thing: confidence. More specifically, the confidence of global investors in the US bond market. Okay, so here's how it could start. Step 1. For whatever reason, maybe the interest payments just look unsustainable, investors around the world start to get nervous. They start whispering, hey, can the US government really pay all this back? And just like that, trust starts to fray at the edges. Then that whisper turns into a full-on panic. Step 2. All the countries, the big banks, the major investors who hold US bonds, which are basically just IOUs from the government, they all try to get rid of them at the same time. They rush for the exits. But here's the problem. When everyone is a seller, who's left to buy? And boom, step 3. Suddenly, US bonds become this flaming hot potato. Nobody wants to be the one left holding them, so bond prices completely crash. And now, if the US wants to borrow more money, it would have to offer insane sky-high interest rates just to convince anyone to lend to them, and that just throws gasoline on the entire fire. Okay, so if that nightmare scenario happens, what's next? Well, this is where it gets really interesting. Experts see two completely different ways this could play out. It's a genuine fork in the road, and the path taken will have huge consequences for all of us. So on the one hand, there's the positive outcome. The argument here is that even in a crisis, everyone still sees the US as the safest place to park their money. A weaker dollar might even kickstart a manufacturing boom by making American exports way cheaper. But then there's the negative path, and it is dark. A total collapse in confidence means borrowing costs go through the roof for everyone, grinding the economy to a halt. The Fed might panic and print trillions of dollars, which could trigger runaway hyperinflation. Ultimately, it all comes down to a single question. Does the world still believe in the US economy? And let's be crystal clear, this isn't just an American problem. There's an old saying, when the US sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold. If US interest rates skyrocket, other countries have to raise their rates too, just to stop money from flooding out of their economies. And what does that mean? It means higher mortgage payments in London, more expensive business loans in Tokyo, a full-on global economic slowdown. Okay, I know this all sounds pretty grim, but it doesn't have to end in disaster. So let's pivot and talk about solutions. What are the actual ways out of this? There are basically 4 main options on the table to fix this mess before we hit that crisis point. All right, so what are they? Option 1 is the dream scenario, a massive economic boom. The economy grows so fast it just leaves the debt in the dust. Option 2 is the risky one, print money, lots of it. It's a quick fix, but you risk hyperinflation and making the dollar worthless. Option 3 is the unpopular one, hike taxes. Nobody likes that, and it's political suicide, especially when the economy is already struggling. And that leaves option 4, cut spending. For many, this is the most realistic path, especially when you start by targeting the massive amounts of government waste. Now, before we wrap up, I have to tell you about one more idea that's been floated, and it's a wild one. There's this bizarre legal loophole that says the US Treasury can mint a platinum coin of any value it wants. So the idea is, why not just mint a coin worth, say, $1 trillion, deposit it at the central bank, and poof, debt gone. Now, while it's technically legal, it's pretty absurd, right? But the fact that it's even being discussed just shows you how serious the other choices are. Because in the end, the biggest challenge here isn't really about economics. It's about politics. It's about having the will to make tough choices now, instead of just kicking the can down the road one more time. The debt clock is ticking, and you have to ask yourself, at some point you're going to run out of road. What happens then?